of Skimmer and Deep Sea Mining, a novel series set in 2040 on the high seas and involving the rollout of high technology, the rise of AI and overdrives, which I'll talk more about soon. So we're into the third series in the podcast now, and of course 3 books have come out now. So we've got Skimmer Deep Sea, book 1 is out. We've got Skimmer Harvest, which is book 2, that's out now as well. And as we well know, we've got book 3 out, Skimmer Mine is out now. And then later this year, we've got book 4 coming out, which is Skimmer Tic Tac. The title, of course, giving the reader some indication that the novel series has something to do with UFOs and UAPs, or the technology around them anyway, and that's embedded in the plot with a backdrop of deep sea mining around it. But today what I wanted to talk about was one of the characters on a skimmer, or one of the roles of a crew member on the skimmer, and the character is Jesse, of course, and that's communications and security officers, and talking about the character of Jesse in that role. Now Jesse, as a person, of course is female. They're usually slightly older than the other crew members, and involved in maintaining security and communications integrity on the skimmers. Now she's quite tall, fair-skinned, probably short, tied back black hair, quite a chiseled appearance, gothic in appearance you might say, and wearing quite a dark coloured, tightly fitting uniform. So in every essence looking rather gothic in character traits. They have an introverted personality usually, so not really extrovert, and renowned for quietly observing what is going on around them and not saying too much unless they have to or have something to say. They have a limited mandate in terms of maintaining discipline on board as well, so they carry a stun rod and handcuffs, and do carry sedatives as well that can be used if needed in the event that the crew gets unruly or out of control. So they do have that role there. It gives them a complicated mandate or ability to interact with the crew, because they can't be their friends, but they can't be their enemy either. So they've got to ensure that they have this emotional connection with the crew while maintaining their own integrity themselves and in a disciplined environment. And so they don't want to be hated by the crew either. So it's quite a difficult position to be in, thus needing a high degree of emotional intelligence to keep the crew on side and also on task, because being a youthful crew, they can become easily distracted if discipline is not maintained in terms of their roles during mining operations, and they go through that whole process at the academy, which we'll talk about another time in terms of crew training. So they're handpicked at the academy. You can't apply to be a communications and security officer. You're offered or asked into that role based on observation of your character during training, because you have operators, you have pilots, you have information officers, and you have technicians as well on board, and then security and communications is another role. So they're picked at the academy for that, and then undergo the necessary training and extra training too in terms of security and national security, and a bit more in-depth knowledge about the skimmers, and especially the overdrives or retrofitted inertial mass reduction drives, because of course those trials or overdrive trials have to be completed, and the fact that they had to be the completion had to be brought forward because of the rise of AI, both by the Chinese and the one that's been discovered on the skimmers by the crew themselves. It becomes ever more important that the overdrive trials are completed without being compromised, and because the other character Sue on the Harvester, who we think is rogue or a plant by the PLA Navy, gets all tied up in this. Security and intelligence and national security becomes crucial in terms of completing the trials and meeting the agenda of Rick's people. And of course mining only benefits from that, and we find out towards the end of the series why that is so, and it's wound or tied up in the plot. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, except to say that the Rick is in very tight communication with communications and security officers on the Skimmers. So Jesse is well aware of the importance of ensuring that the overdrive trials are completed, and that no one goes into that void space underneath the psi console that contains the inertial mass reduction drive in its containment field. I mean, later towards the end of the novel series, we do get access to that and start to understand a bit more about what it is, why it's there, and what it's going to be, why it's so important for the end game, and so important that the Chinese don't get hold of all three things at once. That's both AIs and the overdrive. Now, Globe Corp Mining signed off that they weren't going to touch these overdrives because by 2040, of course, a lot of patented high technology comes out with disclosure, and everyone's well aware of the where that high technology has possibly come from. Now, I haven't written the prequel to the series about crash recovery and inertial mass reduction drives and reverse engineering, so Rick's all tied up in that, and that's an entirely different story that precedes the novel series, or Skimmer novel series, yet to be written. So how does the crew see Jessie? Well, of course, they know she's keeps her distance from them, and they know that she's there to instill discipline if it's needed, and they do try and have some camaraderie with her, but with always with that sort of barrier or maintain that integrity that you can't overstep the mark, because she has a role to play and a function on the Skimmer that's a little bit different to the rest of the crew. So they're well aware she's there to observe, monitor, and to intervene when necessary, because of course with security and communications officers, the security of the Skimmer is top priority. So if anything's going to go wrong and compromise the integrity and security of these Skimmers and the mining operations, the crew is going to come off second best, not in terms of their safety and well-being, but in terms of maintaining order and discipline on the Skimmer. But what does Sue really know about what's going on with the inertial mass reduction drives? Well, we start to get an idea in book 3 and through to book 4 that at the academy they have what would be akin to a ufology course on the history of disclosure and high technology and reverse engineering and crash recovery, covering the last 100 years, because set in 2040, it's going back over 100 years, and divided into a number of different topics that they learn about at the academy, right from ancient history through to pre and post World War II, and then more recent decades in terms of national security and the military-industrial complex, and what we know now by 2040 as coveted technology that's been sourced out to aerospace corporations to develop or try and understand, and that leads us to where we are in the novel series with the appearance of these inertial mass reduction drives. Now the background behind that's a separate book, but the Skimmer communications and security officers have some knowledge, and probably a bit more than others. There's a general course in the academy on all this, but in terms of the actual technology and how it works, now that's where Jessie knows a little bit more about it. Only what she needs to know to ensure she helps maintain the integrity and security of them to complete the overdrive trials to meet the agenda of Rick. Now that's been rushed or brought forward, which puts a lot of pressure on the security and communications officers to ensure that that in fact is the case and that they meet the schedule. Given the rise of AI, the fact that her crew is all caught up in all this and put under a lot of pressure and exposed to things they would not normally be exposed to during a mining operation, that puts a lot of emotional and psychological stress on the crew, which comes out when we look at the dynamics of the crew through the series and the infighting and arguing that causes all the extreme ups and downs of emotions when people get hurt or caught up in situations that are out of their control, and that they have no control over, but have to come up with solutions to get around it, ensure that the crew is able to stay together and move forward together. And so Jessie is all tied up in ensuring that that is the case, and with Rick on her back about making sure that she keeps on top of it as well, and in some pretty high risk situations that they wouldn't normally be in. So Jessie's quite crucial to all of that. Now, in terms of training and high tech at the Academy, again, as I said, they know about the installation of the inertial mass reduction drives and a little bit more about how they function. The mechanics of it all is discussed by the crew quite a few times through book 3 and book 4 about how these things actually work, and not just where they may have come from, or a lot of background behind it in terms of people and personalities that we know have been involved over the decades, either as journalists, researchers, book writers, or have had access and come forward through national security circles and declassified information, or whistleblowers. So all that is instilled through the novel, and as we get to know the characters, the settings, the themes, I will go into a lot more detail about the background research over several years that's been put into the novel and weaved into the plot around all this. And the crew, of course, keeps discussing how these inertial mass reduction drives might actually work based on all the theory and concepts and some engineering, and a lot of discussion about the missing science, or the missing half of public science, that by 2040 most of the world is well aware of, has been coveted or hidden away and come out because of the acknowledgement that patents are really important, and that we need to acknowledge the fact that they've sourced this technology from what we'd call exotic technology. And there's a lot of discussion about where that's come from without going into too much detail. So Jessie, as a communications and security officer, is read into that to the level that she needs to know, without compromising the end game for Rick and his people, which of course only benefits the mining industry in the long run, when they reach the ultimate agenda for the mining contractors and indeed Globe Corp Mining. And there's a lot of play off in that, and there's a lot of ethical questions and dilemmas to overcome in terms of confrontation and conflict between the usurper Sue, Globe Corp Mining, the PLA Navy, the Ocean Academy, Rick and his people, and indeed the people, the crew that crew the Skimmers, because they want to maintain their ability to crew the Skimmers without going into automation. So that's all rolled out in there as well, and Jessie's quite central to that whole area in terms of the crew, even though you may not think so, because of her personality and what she's doing, and she's probably not as well spoken, but you can see in the background that she's always there watching, listening and observing. So I will leave it at that for now. That's the role of communications and security officers, and we'll talk about a few more characters in some upcoming podcasts. So I hope you climb on board and keep getting into these podcasts, and we will just get more and more in depth and into more and more detail as we go through them. There is so much to talk about in World of Skimmer, developed over many years and turned into a novel series and now a podcast. So we will